Taylor Decker's on my All-22 fantasy team, by the way.
Stop it. Nobody cares.
Taylor,
I don't care, and I'm in the league.
I'm just trying to hype up the future of fantasy football here. They told me we could hype it up.
Nobody cares about your fantasy team. That's one of the
It's
cardinal
my
rules
way.
of broadcasting. Regardless of the medium, they don't care.
So the strategic component to this game is through the roof.
Your predictions, right? Your forecasting in fantasy football into how good is this player.
It's gonna change the industry.
Yeah, I moved to the old town where it goes down. Look at me now. I wrote my goals down. I hold it down. Made myself proud. Say, look at me now. Yeah. They picking me now.
Hello and welcome to the All-22 podcast. My name is Chris Lombardi and I'm joined by Bobby Acker and Ray Cotto, and we are the co-founders of All-22. Ray, tell us about the topic of the day.
All right. Hey, everyone. So at All-22, we like to say that we provide a true reflection of the game more than any other platform out there, right? So to put this to the test, we conducted a fun little exercise using our scoring method of the PFF grades times the positional weights for NFL matchups over the course of the 2021 season to see how closely that resembled the actual outcomes of the NFL. So as we'll get into, the top performing teams using our All-22 criteria were also among the best teams in the league last year and went on to have successful seasons, and vice versa for those who were the lowest scoring teams according to our criteria. So we'll also look at a couple standout head-to-head performances, teams with the most overall high-end talent, and most importantly, how valuable those top players were. So let's jump right into it and go with the top scoring NFL teams in All-22, Chris.
Yeah, this is something I'm really excited about. So, we talk about how All-22, like Ray said, is the most accurate reflection of, the best teams in the NFL, the best players in the NFL, the true talent that's out there. So like, how could we possibly prove that? But like running this exercise makes me feel like we have. So when we look at the top scoring All-22 teams, it truly did reflect the top winning NFL teams. So at number 5, we had the Green Bay Packers. They scored over 1,000 points. All of these teams scored over 1,000 points on the season. So 5 was the Green Bay Packers. At number 4, it was the Cincinnati Bengals. At number 3, it was the Los Angeles Chargers. 2 was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And number 1 was the Super Bowl winning LA Rams. So I don't know how you could get more accurate than our number 1 team actually was the team that won the Super Bowl, but I thought that was really cool. Anything to highlight on that, guys?
It's interesting too, as we kind of dive into this, right? Like, we've had users reach out to us and ask us, hey, there's been a couple users who are like, hey, can we open up the weights so that we can adjust them and customize them on our own? Our answer has always been no, and we're very reluctant to do that even in the future, because being realistic is the whole point of this platform, right? So I think going through this exercise, you'll start to see, okay, yeah, this does reflect the real game, so kind of understand why we're not opening up those abilities for users to do that.
Right, that's a good point. And looking at that list again, right, so we had both on that top 5 list, we had both the Super Bowl teams with the Cincinnati Bengals and the Los Angeles Rams, number 1 and number 4. The only team that maybe sticks out is the Chargers, right? Because they weren't a playoff team. When you listen to other sports analysts, everybody's really excited about the Chargers this year. And it's kind of obvious why after running this exercise. Not only did they have a lot of top talent last year, which shows in our equation, but they added guys, Khalil Mack and J.C. Jackson, to that defense. Like, they're only getting better, right? So finishing as the top 3 scoring All-22 team shows that maybe they underperformed. And Ray, do you want to talk about like a few of the reasons why that we saw when we looked at the data?
Yeah, and I think just even before we jump into that, right? I mean, they missed the playoffs, but you can't get much closer to the playoffs than they did while missing the playoffs. They had that crazy overtime game to end the year that I think everyone was rooting for a tie there against the Raiders. They lost 5 games by 1 score or less, or in overtime, right? So, I mean, you really can't get any closer. I mean, they had a young quarterback. I think the offensive line The pass blocking wise was a little shaky early on in the season, and the run defense as well. I think those were the two things that kind of really held them back. But you saw the pieces really start to come together throughout the season, and then now heading into this year again, you see why everyone is so excited about them. So 4 out of the top 5 teams made the playoffs. And the one that didn't really could not have gotten any closer to actually making the playoffs without doing so. So a lot to be excited about for the Chargers moving forward. I think we'll see them up here, on this list, heading or after next year as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I think if you're worried too, right, because like their first 2 picks were low value positions, right, guard and safety, and the safety they picked was not until the 3rd round. But I think, kind of like what Chris just touched on before, like they're already on this list. They're already pretty high on this list, right? They add high value positions like Khalil Mack at edge and J.C. Jackson at corner, and then they load up on defensive interiors, which is also a high value position. Yeah, I'm pretty stoked if I'm a Chargers fan, right? You're looking at this and thinking about next year.
Yeah. The only thing to be concerned about really is, we always say, is that division. It's a bit of a murderer's row, right? So if you have a couple untimely injuries or what have you, that could set you back. But other than that, they're well equipped to make a run.
Yeah, I think something that they might make them stand out in that division is when we look at where they have their talent, right? And that is the reason they're on this list. So when we look at the data, right, they have a top quarterback. They have a top tackle now, potentially with Slater. They have top receivers with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. They have a top corner now with J.C. Jackson. They already had a top edge rusher with Joey Bosa, and they added another one potentially with Khalil Mack. So those are all of our most valuable positions, and that's where they have their best talent.
It's funny, you look at the Rams team from last year, a lot of blue, green grades, and I feel like you very well could look at the Chargers at the end of this year and see the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all of us like Justin Herbert. Some of us, maybe Ray is a little skeptical, but I kind of have no doubts now, right? With the team they built around him, it's really going to rest on his shoulders whether or not they take, because they did miss the playoffs, right? They lost 5 very close games last year. Sometimes that does fall on a quarterback of like, okay, it's on you now. Like you need to control the clock like Tom Brady does, or you need to be able to, get the ball down the field quick like Mahomes and Josh Allen. So this year, are we going to see Justin Herbert become that guy?
I wouldn't say I'm skeptical of Justin Herbert. Not at all. I just think all great quarterbacks have that time period where the NFL adjusts to them a bit. They have a bit of a dip in their performance, and then they adjust to that and not reinvent themselves, but add to their game and continue that, that path to greatness. I wouldn't be shocked if this year there's a little bit of a dip in Herbert's performance, again, just because of the adjustment that the NFL makes and so forth. So it's not that he's not going to be great, still one of the tops in the league, but that time might happen this year as well. That could be a factor in maybe why they don't go as far as they possibly can, is just because maybe the league can adjust to Herbert a little bit. I mean, we saw it with Mahomes last year, right? Everyone thought Mahomes was Superman and invincible. And last year he still had a great season, but it wasn't what we had seen in a couple of years prior. So I think it happens to everyone, and the great ones adjust, and he'll definitely adjust and be at the top of these lists. But that is one factor as well when looking at the Chargers this coming year might this be the year where Herbert has to figure out a couple more things before taking his game to the next level, and what does that look like?
We're doing our buy, sell, hold series on social media, and I think we'll do quarterbacks pretty soon. So if you see people vote for sell on Justin Herbert, that's probably right.
One other thing on this list that I thought was very interesting, right? So we are guilty of this. I've heard a million other people be guilty of this. We are hyping up the AFC, and rightfully so. A lot of those teams have added a lot of talent. But when you looked at this list, the 3 of the top 5 and the top 2 are NFC teams. So when we're talking about the best teams in the NFL, we can't do that without forgetting that the most powerful teams in the past year were NFC teams with the Rams and the Bucks. When we look at who the last 2 Super Bowl winners were, right? It's the Rams and the Bucks. So yes, the AFC is getting powerful. Yes, the AFC is getting deep, and it's definitely deeper than the NFC. But don't be surprised if come Super Bowl time, the Rams, the Bucks, the Packers put up a hell of a fight against whoever ends up making it from the AFC.
Yeah, definitely more top heavy in the NFC.
Yeah, and it also might mean that they're less beat up come playoff time, right? Like their teams together, they have confidence. They, like maybe they're not as battle tested, but that might not be a bad thing when you're talking about you have to play 20 something games to get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so Bobby, you want to talk to us about the bottom scoring teams?
Yeah, painful list. So start off with Houston, New Orleans coming in second lowest, Chicago, my Giants, and the New York Jets at number 5.
Oof. Well, something interesting, because if you're looking at that list and you're saying, where's Jacksonville and Detroit? They were 6 and 7. So they didn't fall far behind these guys.
Which has to make you feel good if you're those teams, right? Because like you're not like that bad, and you have the first 2 picks in the draft, and you address high position value at those picks.
Definitely Detroit.
Kind of good.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, Detroit, sure.
Yeah, definitely Detroit. I think Jacksonville, it's tough because they spent so much money, and the talent they added was kind of subpar. I mean,
I'm just talking about Trevon Walker going 1 overall. Like I'm talking about like just
Sure.
them addressing edge. Like they did get. I think we did after the draft. We did like how much positional value was addressed throughout the draft, and Jacksonville was number 1 across the board.
right.
Jacksonville and Detroit were.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, looking at this list, though, the one that stands out to me is New Orleans. So, like, why is New Orleans on this list? There was a few things that we found when we looked at, kind of like the year they had. And the biggest one, unfortunately, which happens to good teams, is injuries, right? Like, they lost their starting quarterback for half the season. They had inconsistent quarterback play after that. Their star wide receiver was out the entire year, Michael Thomas. Terran Armstead was out for 8 games, and Ryan Ramczyk, who has like literally, I think, missed 1 game in his entire career, missed 7 games. So you're talking about an all-22 value, 20% of your team was out for the majority of the year. So I don't know any other team that would have been able to win with those kind of handicaps.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think a lot of people wouldn't have the Saints pegged as a surprise team for 2022, given the year they had last year, and then they lose, and maybe they still won't be because I think Sean Payton is a big loss regardless. I think I always say he's one of the few value add head coaches in the league, in my opinion. So maybe that ultimately really holds them back. But when you look at the amount of injuries that they had, getting those guys back, and I mean, people forget how good Michael Thomas was, right? 2 years ago, he was the best receiver in the league. So if he comes back to form, right, obviously Terran Armstead's gone for good, but they did add some pieces there. Got a first round wide receiver. That's a high value position as well. So, when you look at this, it's possible the Saints are a bounce back team for 2022. I think a lot is going to rest on the quarterback. And again, we just have to see how the loss of Sean Payton really impacts them. But I just think it was interesting. You see all those injuries and think, oh yeah, maybe the Saints are someone to look out for this year.
Yeah, with 20% of that roster missing, to see what Sean Payton had done with that team was incredible. They missed the playoffs by a game, I think. So I kind of have a feeling that that's going to be a pretty big piece of this.
Have you guys seen the report of where he's looking to go when he comes back inevitably? Sean Payton, I'm talking about.
I didn't see where he's looking to go, but I already know it's like Jerry Jones is getting set to fire Mike McCarthy after the end of the year and just hire Sean Payton. That's who he's wanted all along.
I believe it's Miami, Dallas, and the Chargers.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting.
Imagine if he was on the Chargers.
Miami would have to fire their head coach after 1 season. Dallas would have to admit, Mike McCarthy's not the guy after 2 seasons. And then I just don't see that happening with the Chargers.
What's the name of
people
the
in Dallas admitted that after 2 hours, but that's fine.
What's the name of the Chargers
What's
coach?
that?
I'm blanking on it.
Staley?
Yeah, Staley.
Yeah.
People are pretty mixed about him. I mean, I think he does a really good job. I don't think they should get rid of him. And I could totally see him being like the Zach Taylor this year, of like coach that people are kind of like talking down on. I talk down on Cincinnati's coach, but I could see Staley doing really well.
I mean, Zach Taylor had 3 losing seasons. We just talked about the Chargers getting close to the playoffs by, not getting there because of a tie. Zach Taylor got crushed his first 3 seasons. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't see that happening with the Chargers. I think they have a good coach there. They have their guy for the future. I'm sure Miami's hoping for the same. I think Dallas is probably the realistic option there.
If there was a futures bet to make in Vegas, that's one I would throw a few dollars on. Is Sean Payton to Dallas in 2023?
Yeah.
Only way it doesn't happen is if a Super Bowl, right? It's the only way.
I think NFC Championship game. It's kind of like the end of the Garrett era, where they still made the playoffs a couple years there, but if they couldn't make the championship game, it got stale. And I think that's the standard now for Dallas. And I think Jones has his eye on Sean Payton. So yeah, I think they have to make the NFC Championship game at the least, or there could be some movement there.
Might be seeing some Sean Payton sleepovers in Dallas, like they did with Mike McCarthy.
Next week, we're going to talk about like future stuff, or next episode, maybe not next week, but next episode, we're going to talk about future stuff. So I think we could get more into what these bottom 5 teams did to improve their stock, kind of to Bobby's point, which teams added the most value to their team, the most positional value to their team in the draft. But I don't want to get into that today. So one really cool thing we did, just kind of for fun, is we looked at which team had the highest scoring game. And when we looked at that, it turns out it was the Las Vegas Raiders in week 3 against the Miami Dolphins. We saw something that we've never seen before. We've been playing this game for 3 years, and I don't think we've ever seen a score this high. The Raiders scored 84.6, all 22 points. Do you guys remember, like, what was the highest score we've seen in our 3 years playing this game?
Not close to that. Yeah.
Yeah. 77, I think, was the highest we've seen, and that was in a playoff game.
Wow. Even that's like really high, because I feel like most weeks, right, you see maybe like the high score of like 70, 71, 72. Yeah, Crazy. So, yeah, we saw 84.6 points, and then I looked at the outcome of the game and was a little confused because the Raiders did win, but they won 31-28. So, like, what happened there? Turns out Miami was the second highest scoring team that week with 80.8, which was also the second highest score of the season. So, literally the 2 highest scoring all 22 games happened in the same game. And it turned out to be a 31-28 game, which is pretty awesome. Something I definitely want to like turn the film on and watch again.
Yeah, and you wouldn't think, ironically, right, like a game with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback would end up being a game where both teams score and objectively perform well, right? But both defenses played really well. For the Dolphins, the defense played incredible. Zach Seiler, Emmanuel Ogbah, and Andrew Van Ginkel, and Jalen Phillips, actually, so 4 pass rushers all performed very well. So great defensive performances there. On the Raiders side, you had Carr, Ruggs, Renfro, and Brian Edwards all graded very highly. Max Crosby, Yannick Ngakoue, and Solomon Thomas all played well as well. Trayvon Mullen, Nate Hobbs, they actually had 8 players on defense grade above a 70, which is a very quality performance on an individual level. So to have 8 players on just one side of the ball perform that highly is definitely a top flight performance and not something you see every week.
Yeah, in context there, like an average score for a player is a 60. So to have 8 players grade 70 or higher is like a unicorn game. So we talked about the high scoring game. Now we're going to talk about the lowest scoring game. It actually was the Houston Texans. No big surprise there. They scored a 45.3 in all 22. So that is like a devastatingly low score. Essentially no way a team can win. They were playing the Colts. They lost 31-0. Davis Mills threw no touchdowns. He threw 2 interceptions. So, you can look at like traditional statistics and still find some things that will tell you a bit of the story. But yeah, we're doing tons of research into kind of like head-to-head matchups and how our all-22 grading impacts the outcome of the game. And when we looked at just week 1 of last season, we found that the higher scoring all-22 team won 12 out of the 16 times. So it's very accurate. The 4 games that the higher scoring team lost, it was less than 2 points. There was never like a team that had 5 points on the other team loses that game. So it is very, very accurate, which I think is really cool.
We should start gambling, guys.
We are not a gambling site.
Yeah.
All right, so
Moving on from there, not touching that.
yeah. let's go into.
We got to put some edge in this podcast, guys. All right.
Listen,
move on.
I don't have enough money to pay for lawyers to talk about that stuff, so I'm good.
I'm not saying that our listeners should gamble. I'm saying the 3 of us individually, where it's legal in New York, we can gamble.
Yeah, good save there. Legal in New York.
But anyway, go ahead.
All right. So moving on from like the team standpoint of team grading, earlier in the year, we had put out on social a couple lists, right? One of them was the top 5 players per position. And then the other list was kind of like our top 100 all-22 scorers. So 2 very different lists. But we wanted to kind of compare the 2, right? So when we looked at those, we wanted to say, which one's more important? Is it more important to have more top players regardless of position, or is it more important to have just the top players in all-22, right? So does positional weight matter in this conversation in terms of teams getting wins and losses? So it turns out, as most of us would probably guess, it's very important. So we want to first look at kind of like the top 5 groups and which team succeeded the most there. Ray, do you want to start that off?
Yeah, sure. So there were actually just 3 teams with 4 players in the top 5 of their positions, and that was the Dallas Cowboys, Las Vegas Raiders, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Dallas finished 12-5, Vegas was 10-7, and Tampa was 13-4. So if you look at that breakdown, right, for Dallas, they had Dalton Schultz, tight end, Anthony Brown, Ezekiel Elliott, and Zach Martin at guard. The Raiders had Max Crosby, Trevon Moehrig, Colton Miller, and Casey Hayward. And the Bucs had Shaq Barrett, Tristan Wirfs, Donovan Smith, and Tom Brady, of course. So their combined record was 35-16. So having just a wealth of top players, as you might expect, does impact you positively on the field and contributes a lot to those wins. And then after that, we had 10 teams with at least 3 players in the top 5 of their positions, and 7 of those 10 teams had winning records as well. So you definitely see the impact of just acquiring talent overall. But then as you dive a little bit further, you see where the value comes into play and how, depending on where those top players are, can either take you further or limit you in the playoffs and late in the year against other great teams as well. So, Chris, I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think let's first start with like Dallas, right? So Dallas, yes, they were 12-5, had a great great regular season. They go to the playoffs. They didn't do much, right? And when we say they didn't do much, it's a great achievement to make the playoffs, but having your top talent be your tight end, a guard, a running back, and then a corner isn't going to carry you deep in the playoffs, right? You need that quarterback, you need an edge rusher, you need a receiver, you need a tackle. Like, those are the things I think Dallas is missing. Is Dak that player? It's kind of still TBD. I think he's close. I think he can be. But I don't think we saw that last year. Similar things can be said about Vegas as well, right? So yes, they had an edge rusher. Yes, they had a tackle, but having a safety being one of those players, that's not the most valuable position. Can Derek Carr be the guy? I think he can, but again, like, maybe we're not seeing enough still to get him into that conversation. Like we said about Justin Herbert, right? Is he going to have those marquee games where he's either controlling the ball perfectly to get his team to a win, or is he doing the things like getting the ball down the field quickly to win a game in the last minute when the team needs him to? Like, I still think Dak and Carr haven't shown us they can do that consistently yet, and against like the best teams in the playoffs. Something I'm still looking forward to. Then going to the other list, right, with the teams that had only 3 players, a few teams I wanted to highlight: Indianapolis, New Orleans, and the Chargers all finished 9-8, and they all missed the playoffs, right? So they all missed the playoffs. Let's look at them individually. Indianapolis, their 3 players on that list were a running back and 2 linebackers. The Chargers, it was a center, a running back, and a quarterback. So yes, they had the quarterback, but center and halfback are 2 of, I think, our 3 or 4 lowest value positions. And then New Orleans, they did have an edge rusher, but the other 2 were linebacker and safety. None of them were on offense, right? They were missing Jameis. They were missing Michael Thomas, Ramczyk, Terran Armstead. So, like, it's no surprise, right? Yes, you had good players, so you were able to win games, but you didn't have good players at the right positions, so you didn't end up making it very far. The other teams, right? Kansas City, the Rams, San Francisco, Tennessee, they all had more high-value positions. Kansas City, ironically, actually didn't, because Mahomes didn't make our top 5 list. But I think it's fair to say that, like, when you have a guy like Mahomes that's that talented and in any game can do that to another team, you know, like putting up those games like he did against the Bills, you know, I think it says a lot about him. Anything else you guys wanted to point out on that list?
No, I think it's interesting to see, though, like we talked about the teams that had, you know, that had 4 players in the top 5 of their position, right? And you look at Tampa's list, right? If you have 4 guys that make this list, you want this list to look exactly like Tampa's. Edge rusher, 2 tackles, and a quarterback. Like, it doesn't really get much better than that. So I think the takeaway for that is, like, when you're building your All-22 team, probably want to go with the same kind of structure. If your best players are your tackles, your edge rushers, your quarterback, you're going to win a lot of games.
100%. I think Chris Godwin has made this list before, but didn't, obviously, because he dealt with injuries and stuff. But he's somebody that could very well be on this list next year, right? So not only would they have the tackles, the edge rusher, the quarterback, but they would also have a receiver, which is the next most valuable position, which is pretty cool. All right, then the teams that we highlighted were the winning teams. There were 3 teams that didn't have a winning record that also had 3 players in our top 5 list, and that was Atlanta, Cleveland, and Washington. So again, none of them had a quarterback, none of them had a receiver. I think only Cleveland had an edge rusher, Myles Garrett. None of the other ones had an edge rusher. So looking at Atlanta first, right? They had a cornerback, they had a guard, and they had a tight end. They had Kyle Pitts. They had, does anybody know who the guard was? I can't think of it off the top of my head. But the corner was H.A. Terrell, who was, I think, our top-rated corner. The real thing that's really interesting about these 3 teams were the quarterbacks that led them, right? So while Kansas City was able to get to a winning record and get to the playoffs with not having the most valuable positions being their top players, they had Patrick Mahomes, right? Atlanta has Matt Ryan, who was our 15th ranked quarterback last year, finished 15th in our quarterbacks last year. Cleveland had Baker Mayfield, who finished 22nd, and Washington had Taylor Heineke, who finished 23rd. So not having those top half quarterbacks will lead you to a losing record if you don't have valuable positions elsewhere.
The guard you were looking for was Chris Lindstrom, by the way.
Yep. Chris Lindstrom, perfect. All right, so go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, no, quarterback matters at the end of the day. If you don't have a top 5 quarterback, they still have to be probably in that top 10 to 12 range at the very least. Otherwise, you're really handicapping yourself, and just acquiring talent doesn't on its own make up for that deficiency. So I think that proves a pretty strong point there.
Right. So that was the top 5 list. Now we're looking at the top 100, right? And I said that it's almost like eye-opening how different these lists are. So before, in the top 5 list, we had Dallas, we had Oakland, we had Vegas, and we had Tampa Bay. Now looking at the teams with the top 100, with 7 players in the top 100 were the Rams. With 6, it was the Seahawks. 5 was the Cincinnati Bengals. 5 was the 49ers. And 5 was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, again, we have the 2 teams that played in the Super Bowl. We have another team that played in the NFC Championship game. And then Tampa Bay also went deep in the playoffs. There is an outlier here with Seattle, but we'll talk about that. let's first talk about LA. Ray, tell me why was LA so successful? Where were those players?
Yeah, so you look at the Rams there, right? You have Aaron Donald on the defensive line, Andrew Whitworth at tackle, Cooper Kupp. You had Leonard Floyd on the edge, Matthew Stafford, Rob Havenstein on the offensive line there at tackle as well, and Von Miller. I mean, that's 2 pass rushers, a quarterback, a wide receiver, 2 tackles, and the best defensive interior player in the league and possibly in history. It's just a grand slam. Not sure anything else needs to be said outside of that, but that's exactly, again, where you want your top players. And I mean, they won the Super Bowl for a reason. So that's probably why.
Right. Those 7 players, right? The top players on their team, those 7 players would make up 42% of your all-22 game grade, right? So like they're getting almost half of their success, half of a team's success that they would need from 7 players, and they're all the best at their positions, right? Like they're all like top of their positions. It's incredible. It's exactly like what Bobby said before. Like if you were to start a team, this is exactly what you would want to do. So 2 on this list was the Seahawks, right? They had 6 players in the top 100 list. What the hell happened to them?
Yeah, so it's funny, right? Yes, people will point to the obvious and look at the Russell Wilson injury, which is obviously a huge factor, right? So their 6 top 100 players were Al Woods, DK Metcalf, Dwayne Brown, Poona Ford, Russell Wilson, and Tyler Lockett, right? So 2 defensive interior players, a tackle, 2 receivers, and a quarterback. On the surface, I mean, that looks, those are important positions, right? That's also where you want most of your best players to be. But when you look at the season, right, I mean, Russell Wilson was actually the top quarterback through the first 5 games of the season before getting hurt, injuring his finger. And then once he returned, he was below average in 6 out of the 7 games he played after returning from injury. He averaged 7.8 points per game on his own in those first 5 games, and then not even close thereafter. So just for some context there, Joe Burrow averaged 7.6 points per game and was the highest grading quarterback or highest scoring quarterback last season. So he was on a pace to be the top guy overall at quarterback. They also played in a tough division, right? You have the Rams, the 49ers, and the Cardinals, who all made the playoffs. And despite, yes, the position that they did have those top players in was important, but pass blocking as a whole for them was a huge problem. They were 25th in the league as a pass blocking offensive line. And really the interior was just a mess from a pass blocking standpoint. Damian Lewis, Gabe Jackson, and they had a bit of a revolving door due to injury at center as well. All had well below average pass rush or pass blocking grades rather. Dwayne Brown was still a pretty good player, right? He made this list, but again, age is starting to catch up to him too. And then Brandon Shell at right tackle, maybe average at best. So you kind of see the story there, how the offensive line just kind of, really set the team back. And then obviously the injury really just gave them a death blow that they couldn't recover from, especially being in such a tough division.
Seems like it's been the same story with them for years, right? I mean, it sucks to see Russell be a completely different player in the second half of the season right after that injury. Really glad that I used like the second overall pick in all 15 of my All-22 leagues to get Russell Wilson. But it's super disappointing to see a talent like that, wasted, for lack of a better word. But yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about you, Bobby, right when I saw this, because we're talking about the Seahawks. They had valuable players at valuable positions. They had a lot of them. They were a really good team, but their quarterback got hurt and didn't end up being able to perform really well towards the end of the season. And because of that, they weren't a playoff team. In 2020, you also had Russell Wilson, right? Dynasty, you've had him. In 2020, you made it to the championship game with Russell Wilson, right? He had like a 90-something PFF grade on the season. The next year, it hurt, right? Like you not having him for parts of the season hurt. I don't remember where you ended up last year, but you still did pretty well. But like, I don't think you made it that far.
What do I say to you guys all the time? The easiest job in the world is to be Russell Wilson's general manager. It's the easiest job in the world. And how they could have screwed that up the past few years is just beyond me. All you have to do is just give him some protection. He'll control the rest of the game. That's it. And how they failed to do that almost his entire time in Seattle is just, it's beyond me.
So are you extremely high on him in Denver?
Oh my God, yeah. Absolutely. Because I think you see a lot of quarterbacks, right? Like they'll get hit a lot, and then you'll start to see their internal clock start to go. And I don't think you're going to see that with Russell Wilson. I think he's still going to be, that same quarterback who's comfortable in the pocket, who doesn't take hits. I don't think there's a quarterback in the league who's better than that, better than Russell Wilson at that. So yeah, no, I'm super high on Russell Wilson this year.
Yeah, one of the other, like we have a friend in another league that was trying to trade for Russell Wilson. He was conflicted, and he's like, he's already 32, 33 years old. He's like, do I trade for a guy like that? But like, he talks about playing till he's 40 something. And this season was the first season he missed games. So like, I am full in. I would invest. Absolutely. I wouldn't even second guess myself.
Yeah. Cause I think the way he plays, he could play until he's 40. He can play from the pocket very well, as well as any quarterback in the league. So doesn't solely rely on his legs. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think we see a lot more of that.
He's on my buy list if he's there for you. What's that?
I think we see a lot more of that this year, him staying in a pocket, right? Like if he's going to have the protection, I think he's going to use it. Number 3 on this list was actually the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, they were the Super Bowl team. They had 5 players finishing in our top 100, and those 5 players were a quarterback, 2 receivers, a tackle, and an edge rusher. So again, if you were building your team, this is how you want to do it. It's the most valuable positions. Quarterback Joe Burrow, receivers was Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, tackle Jonah Williams, who performed really well. He dealt with injury stuff in the past. I think this was kind of like his breakout year, but nobody talked about it. And then edge rusher was Sam Hubbard. So you have to be excited about that team because, again, they only got better this offseason. I don't want to go too much into the future, but they only got better.
Just add another tackle on there and you'll be fine. On that list, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's the difference between winning and losing a Super Bowl. Maybe.
It's funny.
If Burrow hadn't gotten nicked up.
Remember the stick figure drawing?
Yeah.
Remember the stick figure drawing in like the beginning of the season? Everybody thought it was bullshit. Sorry. Are we cursing on this podcast? Now we just did. I feel like it's funny because what was it? He had who was it? Who do you have streaking down the sideline wide open? It's Jamar Chase, right?
Jamar Chase.
But couldn't get there because Joe Burrow's getting hit. It's almost exactly the stick figure drawing that people, were hating on all off season. So pretty ironic.
Yeah, it really is. I hear some of the PFF guys talking about like roster building and how their preference, what they think works better is to have the quarterback, have the 2 receivers, and have like an average offensive line. Like you don't need to have the top offensive line. You need to at least have average. I don't know if I agree with that. I think like I would feel better having Sewell and Jonah Williams blocking for my quarterback with T. Higgins and maybe a lesser number 2 receiver. But obviously you can't knock them because they did make it to the Super Bowl. Just maybe not how I would have done it. Bobby, you want to talk about?
Yeah, I like it. I like having 2 solid tackles, and then like the middle can be mediocre. I'm fine with that.
Exactly.
But those high value tackles, I want them to be bookends.
Mm-hmm. I kind of like having a really good center too. Like I'm a little biased just because like I like having the quarterback at the line be a top player, even if they're not like skill wise a top player. I need them to at least be like a leader and a communicator. Bobby, we were talking about that for the Giants this year, right? Because like I wanted them to get the guy from Tampa when he was a free agent, Jensen. But they didn't. They ended up getting a guy from Buffalo, which maybe makes more sense. Maybe he's not talent-wise a top player, but maybe he knows that playbook, and he's a field general. Right, exactly. But Bobby, talk about San Francisco.
Good luck finding those top centers, Chris, because there's only like 2 of them.
Yeah.
Fair. San Francisco on this list, Arik Armstead, Deebo Samuel, Jimmy Garoppolo, Nick Bosa, and Trent Williams. Again, another team that did some work in the playoffs. showing a quarterback, receiver, tackle, edge, DI on this list. So all very valuable positions. Maybe not quite, the list of positions you'd want to see here. Maybe that's why they didn't go so far. But still a pretty damn good list nonetheless.
Yeah, and I think just for context, I'm sure people are listening going, Jimmy Garoppolo, like what? Well, that's mostly because of the value of the quarterback position that bumps him into the top 100. And, you could have the discussion about how much of that was actually Shanahan and the offense versus Jimmy G himself and so forth. But just for some context there, I think it was something like maybe 30 quarterbacks in the top 100 list because of the value of that position. So when you're talking about the top teams on this list, it's almost like that one at quarterback is almost like a default. If you don't have a quarterback in the top 100, then you're really in trouble because most of them make the top 100 list as a result of the position value.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Ren.
Before anyone attacks us for having Jimmy G as the top 100 player.
Right. But I think that's you could point to the Saints, right? Like the Saints are that team. They have some of the pieces. They have had some of the pieces, but the last couple of years they haven't been able to be super successful because at quarterback they don't have that guy. And you can knock Jimmy G all you want. Fact of the matter is he took a team to a Super Bowl and now an NFC Championship game. No, he's not a top quarterback in the NFL, but he's at least middle of the pack and he's a good game manager. So in All-22, that's still valuable. The quarterback's always going to be valuable. It's the most important position on the field. So having even an average one is valuable. Ray, talk about Tampa Bay.
Yeah, so Bobby touched on it earlier on in the show, right? Hey, this is exactly how you want to build your roster. When you expand to the top 100, you add Chris Godwin to the list. So now you add a receiver. So you have, again, Tom Brady at quarterback, Shaq Barrett at edge, Donovan Smith and Tristan Wirfs at tackle. And so that's your your 5 top 100 players all at the 4 most valuable positions at quarterback, receiver, offensive tackle, and edge rusher. So exactly how you want it built. It's why they won the Super Bowl 2 years ago and why they were a top contender this past year as well. So the Bucks just did it right.
Are they going to be back?
Yeah. There's 2 other good teams in the NFC, so yeah, they'll be back. At least one last go around.
Yeah. All right, cool. So the last thing I wanted to just talk about when we talked about these lists, right? The top 100. So when we looked at the top 100, what positions made it onto that list? So there were 31 quarterbacks, which, like Ray said, if you don't have a quarterback on that list, something is very wrong. And there was only one team that didn't have one make this list. And I think it was because that guy got injured and they didn't play enough games. Number 2 was wide receiver. There were 22 wide receivers. Tackle was 3rd with 18. Edge was 4th with 18. Tied for 3rd with 18. And defensive interior had 11. So, we're going to talk about positional scarcity. We're working on the draft guide right now that we hope to get out to you soon. But these are things you want to think about, right? Which positions are deep, which positions have the most variance. And in the top 100, you can see that there are a lot of talented players scoring well at some of these key positions. But guys, I think that's all we got. Is there anything else that you want to add for today?
I think we beat this one to death. Can't wait to look forward next week using the same criteria for this upcoming season. It's going to be a lot of fun.
No gambling, though. No gambling.
Yeah, absolutely. And we could have talked about Baker today, but I honestly had no interest in talking about Baker. Every other podcast did. We're good. But yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. If you haven't done so yet, please visit all-22.com.
Wait, Chris, we can talk about Zach Wilson banging MILFs if you want. We can go that direction before we leave.
That'd be pretty cool. I mean, just stay away from
need some edge.
Got that.
No,
stay away from our parents. You know what I mean?
We have a clean rating on iTunes.
You can't say MILF.
I understand Zach Wilson's an NFL player, but our dads will still kick his ass. You know what I mean? I have no doubt in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so
That's a
thank
good
you
way
for
to
tuning
go.
in. If you haven't done so yet, visit all-22.com to sign up. We are live, so you can sign up. You can join leagues. You can start your drafts. Like, all that stuff is happening right now. Don't miss out. Use promo code all22PFF, all caps. So all22PFF for 40% off your subscription. If you haven't done so yet, if you're listening to us and you don't follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, it's kind of a problem. Get on there. Follow us on Twitter at all22_PFF, and then leave a review for our podcast, whether it's on YouTube or Apple or whichever platform you use. It's going to help more people hear us, and that's what we're looking to do. So thanks again for listening, and we hope you enjoyed.
Think that boosts Zach Wilson's PFF grade, by the way?